Welcome back to another edition of the Too Deep Podcast. A lot to get to here tonight. We have one less full-time head coach as Nathaniel Hackett's been fired. What took so long? Who's next for the Denver Broncos? What head coach is next to be fired? J.J.Watt announces this will be his final season. Are the Dolphins done? Are the Packers a playoff team? Has the Eagles' defense come full circle and is now a problem? Giant Monday Night Football game between the Bills and the Bengals. Raiders are benching David Carr. Justin Herbert has answered all the questions, or has he, Eric? We find that out. I know everybody's anticipating that. Did the Lions blow their playoff loss? The beloved Lions of one Eric Eager. Seems like Jeff Chadiha knew the Lions a lot better last week when we talked on last week's edition of the 2D podcast. But I don't know. Maybe there's new information. I reserve the right to change my opinion if there is. What are we all looking at in week 17? Let's find out right now. It's time for the 2D podcast brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete.
This is the Too Deep NFL Podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the National Football League, breaking down the NFL like no one else can. Too Deep is hosted by Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro. Jeff is a senior columnist and on-air personality for the NFL Network and NFL.com. Eric is the senior VP of Research and Development for Sumer Sports. Soren Petro is the host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Too Deep Podcast is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro.
Yes, indeed. My name is Soren Petro, joined as always by the NFL Network's NFL almost called it Eric Eager. That would not be correct. Jeff Chadiha, the NFL Network, and Eric Eager from Sumer Sports. Thank you to Curtis Siebel for the introduction. And guys, let's dive right into it. One less full-time head coach. We watched Steve Wilkes do a pretty good job in Carolina as the interim. I don't have that kind of high hope of any kind of resurrection here for the Denver Broncos over the final weeks. But, Jeff, I mean, really, listen, I'm not going to say it was outlandish or ridiculous that they didn't do this sooner. I get it. I mean, in a lot of ways, even if you've decided, okay, we're going to go down this route, what do you really gain by getting to the interim coach? I think the Carolina Panthers thought they had a team that could contend in a weak division, so we know why they did it. Is this just an example of a team that really looked at it very quickly and said, we're not contending anyway? So what's the point of just being down one coach, one piece of manpower along the way? Or did the Broncos handle this the wrong way?
Well, I think it's like three coaches, right? They got rid of the special teams coach and the O-line coach too. No, I think they got tired of watching their team on nationally televised TV getting destroyed. I mean, it was just picked the wrong time to have a bad coach, a declining quarterback, and a team that seems to always be the darling of primetime television. And look, there are a lot of things wrong with the Denver Broncos, but I think it was the smart move to cut bait with this. You know, a lot of dynamics played into this. New ownership. You know, George Payton's been there a couple of years. They really put their hat into the ring of Nathaniel Hackett in the hopes that he could be the guy who could get that offense going. And so I think it probably could have happened sooner if there was a more firmly entrenched ownership and people not trying to figure things out on the fly. I mean, it's as much as we want to believe NFL owners are really got it together and know everything and are really savvy business people. They're like a lot of people who have a lot of money. They're trying to figure it out on the fly and make sense of it. And they're in a new space with the NFL. So I think that they had to fire the guy at some point. They couldn't bring him back. You saw all the infighting on the sidelines, all the tantrums by players like Jerry Jeudy. It just seemed like a dumpster fire all season. It was time for him to go.
Anytime somebody can get in the phrase dumpster fire, I'm a happy guy. And yes, this was that for sure. By the way, kind of combed, not as combed as last week, as people always. Eric Eager's hair seems to be our number one topic. Jeff is back in the hat.
I just wore it because somebody kept asking about it.
Yeah. I am sans the QT cup, which by the way is just a cup I keep to like refill so that if I ever take off and go somewhere, then I have to leave the cup behind. It's not like, some $40 mug that everybody carries around these days. It's just a plastic cup. Settle down, people. Eric, how about it? Did they handle this the right way? I think Jeff's nailed it. I mean, I think your new owners, you're kind of like, all right, when's the right time to blow this up? I think when you've got the quarterback talking through a football and the offensive line blowing up and nobody helping him up. I mean, it's clearly become an absolute dumpster fire, to quote the great Jeff Chadiha. But did they get it right in the timing, or could something have been salvaged from the season earlier?
First off, Petro, David Carr, love it. Your commitment to getting first names wrong. Pristine.
Nobody missed that one either, right?
No one missed that one. Maybe it's because
look,
I interviewed David Carr and I really enjoyed the conversation last summer. So I say, David, it's Derek Carr.
You enjoying that conversation was a bigger underdog than the Bengals are this week. This is about all they could do, right? I mean, I think Peyton has had success with the Vikings drafting. He was the one that signed off on and gave Wilson the extension, so he is not innocent here. But Hackett was the only guy that could get rid of in this case, right? And the only way out of this, Chiefs fans know this, when your quarterback makes a lot of money, even when he's great, it's hard to build a roster, right? And it's hard to build a roster without hitting on draft picks. When your quarterback makes a lot of money and he's not great, which is where Wilson currently is and is trending, you have to nail multiple drafts to even make this thing work. And so, I think when they got rid of Hackett, that was something that needed to happen. It was an admission, not only that Hackett couldn't do the job, but also an admission that this year was not okay. There was expectations, season win total of 10, right? And the Raiders and Broncos have fewer wins than the Chiefs combined, two teams that went all in to beat the Chiefs this year. And so it's an admission that this season was not okay. But they, ultimately, if they would also go in a different direction at general manager, the task is still the same for the guy that, replaces him, which is, draft, get about a bumper crop of picks, much like, New Orleans did in 2017, Atlanta did in 16. Like, you really need to have that great draft to get yourself out of this because there's no other way.
Not going to happen, right? Because they don't have those picks, right? So that they got to make it happen with Russell. I almost called him Russell Simmons. How about that? Russell Wilson. Russell Westbrook came to mind.
Simmons might be better now as a quarterback.
Westbrook's a better passer than Wilson at this point.
Yeah. Maybe. As a Laker fan, let me just say that maybe. A lot of assists. Yeah. A 1.7 to 1 assist to turnover ratio doesn't inspire anybody. And that's probably, I'm giving him credit. Jeff, listen. Russell Wilson, I had to check myself there for a second. Russell Wilson is going to be there for a while, basically just based on the contract, unless somebody will take the contract off of him. And even that doesn't work. I mean, you have to renegotiate it. And the NFLPA get involved in that with you devaluing the contract. So basically they're married to him for a couple more years. Saw a list of head coach odds. Dan Quinn, even money. Apparently he was runner-up last go-round.
No.
Defensive coordinator. Jim Harbaugh, Michigan, 5-1. Sean Payton, 5.5-1. Everyone has them going to the Chargers. The Chargers are now 9-6, right? And going to the playoffs. So that doesn't look like that job's going to be open, but stranger things have happened. Playoff coaches have been fired. DeMeco Ryans, 8-1, defensive coach. And Frank Reich at 10-1. Those are the top 5 odds I saw. Eric, you may have seen a different list. Who is the right guy to turn the Broncos around?
Well, I think whoever it is going to have a West Coast offensive background because that's what he's played in for his entire career. Crazy stat I heard on Get Up this morning that was thrown out there that there's only 3 quarterbacks in NFL history with a passer rating over 100 for their careers: Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, and Russell Wilson. And so you have to think that even in decline, there's something that can still be mined from him that can be useful. I remember something Steve Young told me a long time ago about playing quarterback in the NFL. As you get older, even though your talents decline, your physical ability declines, your ability to see stuff increases. And so you should be able to be like Peyton Manning was later in his career, somebody who can still manage a game well. And so I would think that you find somebody with a West Coast offense background, or somebody who's willing to hire a coordinator with a West Coast offense background, which is, it almost makes more sense to go with a defensive-minded coach, given the success he had with Pete Carroll and the understanding that a defensive-minded coach will have of how to use a quarterback like him. Like sometimes when you get offensive-minded guys, no offense, Eric, they want to do big things. They want to do crazy stuff. Defensive-minded guys are more practical. They know what they're working with. They know how to make it work with guys like Russell Wilson at this point in their career. So I would go with, I don't think it's going to be Harbaugh. I don't see Sean Payton taking a job. Dan Quinn probably makes a lot of sense, or anybody. I don't even think Frank Reich makes sense. I think you hire a defensive coach, you get a good coordinator who probably get Brian Schottenheimer or get, I forget the last guy they had was a Green Bay guy too, who was in Seattle with him, Darrell Bevel. Someone like that to come in and work with him and run the football, play action, and play defense.
I love your point about sometimes offensive minds want to think big, and maybe that's how Nathaniel Hackett came in. I've never kind of put
Petro, let's back up. Let's not overthink this. Nathaniel Hackett didn't think at all. Come on, man. Let's not fit. Let's not.
I'm complimenting Jeff.
Overfit.
Yeah.
Nathaniel Hackett was not an issue of. Nathaniel Hackett was not a failure of type. Nathaniel Hackett was an overall failure. Let's not get it twisted.
Yes,
he didn't fail because he was an offensive coach. He failed because he was a bad coach.
It's why I love doing these podcasts with you guys, because you're a handful of the guys that actually make me go, "Huh, I hadn't thought about that." Right? That's why I say I hadn't put my arms around that concept that Jeff just said, but I think he's right. I will object a little bit. I think that's a great point. And listen, if you could get Mike Tomlin, if you can get Bill Belichick, if you can get a guy who's been a winner, but I think a prospect defensive coach, Dan Quinn's been around and he's won, but I think Dan Quinn is what Dan Quinn is. I think Dan Quinn, the defensive coordinator, is in exactly the spot he ought to be in. I think Dan Quinn, the head coach, is overmatched. And I think Dan Quinn, the head coach, is still looking for an offensive coordinator. And when he had one, he looked pretty good in Atlanta. When he didn't, it fell apart. And so I think the big picture is you'd like to find that offensive mind. I think it is kind of an interesting thought. Like, do you go that road and kind of in the back of your mind going, look, we'll fire him in 3 years. If we get offensive talent, we build it up, and we've had a hot shot offensive coordinator and he's left, like, we can always make a change at that time. I think that's an interesting side, but I almost feel like Jim Harbaugh is an offensive mind that coaches like a defensive coach. He's up there banging the run with your Wolverines, Jeff, and had success in it, playing defense. He's not afraid to invest resources in the defensive side of the ball, which they've already got there in Denver. Eric, what do you think? Like, me, I'd never turn down Mike Tomlin. I love Mike Tomlin, and there are certainly going to be some good defensive guys out there that are going to make great head coaches. Rule of thumb, I'll always take the offensive mind. You like anyone on that list? You got anyone else that you think is the right kind of guy to turn things around?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with like a guy like Frank Reich is that like he's never really had success at the QB position. Luck he had for a year, then he retired. I like Frank Reich as a guy. Everybody that I know in Indianapolis, a wonderful person, really could be the kind of guy that needs to, it depends upon what kind of guy Russ is, right? If Russ is the kind of guy that needs somebody to hold his hand as he sort of gets out of this thing, then maybe it's Frank Reich. I do agree with Tomlin to a certain extent, because I actually believe that Russell Wilson's going to need a guy who's more powerful than him and comes in and says, like, look, man, like, you've, the way that you've conducted yourself over the past, 2-3 years is unacceptable for a person who leads a football team, right? Like all this method acting and talking to your imaginary friends and fake hands, like all that stuff. Like, you think Mike Tomlin would put up with that shit? No. Like, there's no way he would, And
I mentioned Tomlin just as like a defensive coach that I think is really.
But Tomlin, I mean, to me, the issue is this is where that gets back to the problem, because the Broncos have so little in the cupboard. They have a good defense, but so little in the cupboard that a coach like Tomlin or a coach like Peyton or a great coach who's looking for a fresh start. And there are no rumors about Tomlin. Petro just brought him up.
Yeah.
But like,
I brought him up as an example because universally, if I were an owner, I would never hire a defensive coach unless Mike Tomlin were in an Andy Reid-like situation.
Yeah, or Vrabel or somebody like that, right? Like a guy, there are guys who are kind of elevators, although, the Titans have come on hard times. But like, to me, I do like that kind of coach that steps in and says, Russ, you are not the most important person on this team anymore. You certainly didn't play like it last year. And whatever groove you got into, acting the way that you do, all it does is make these other guys roll their eyes at you. And in Seattle, things worked out okay so that you could act that way and people followed along. But once, the moment that stuff didn't work in Denver, everybody bailed on you, right? So you need, like, Nathaniel Hackett wasn't a strong enough presence to come in and correct that. And, like Shane Steichen Shane Steichen, the offensive coordinator of the Eagles, has been wonderful for the Eagles. Amazing. I don't know necessarily if he has the demeanor and the credibility to step in and put Russell Wilson in his place. You need a head coach that'll come in and put Russell Wilson in his place because everything just got out of control this year.
Isn't Sean Payton out of that list?
Why would Sean Payton do that, Soren, though? That's my issue, is why would Sean Payton go to a team with no first-round pick, with kind of a crappy roster, and in a division that you're not winning that division because of the Chargers and the Chiefs?
I think the answer is, what job's going to be open that has a better quarterback than Russell Wilson? And I know everybody can sit here and be like, oh, he's the worst quarterback in football. He's not. He's played at a higher level. 2 years ago, about 2 years and 3 weeks ago, he was the front runner for the MVP of the NFL. And he's not 39 now. So he's what, 34, I think now?
34. He's 34.
34. So, I mean, you tell me, and if Sean Payton comes back, do you think he's signing up for a 20-year hitch? I think he's signing up for another 4 or 5 year hitch. I think anyone who thinks they're getting more than 5 years out of Sean Payton and hiring him is kidding themselves. I'm with you. I don't think it's the most delectable job out there, out of the 32 that are available, but how many of them are actually going to be available, right? I mean, I think that's the question, Jeff. Who's next? I mean, like, Cliff Kingsbury is the betting favorite. If you look at the odds for who's going to get fired next, Cliff Kingsbury is minus 700. They are going to pay the freight and be done.
He's over Lovey?
Yeah, Lovey Smith 3-1. So, you're plus 300, but it's minus 700 on Kingsbury. This is just one place I found some odds. 3-1 on Lovey Smith, 4.5-1 on Josh McDaniels, 9-2, 7-1 on Dennis Allen, 7.5-1 to Kevin Stefanski, 7.5-1 on Todd Bowles. So the overwhelming favorite is Cliff Kingsbury. Does Arizona look like a better spot? Or will the Chargers make a move even though they're in the playoffs? Does Staley giving him the game ball? We all saw that on SportsCenter. Giving Spanos the game ball, nudge, nudge. Hey, boss, look, we're in the playoffs. Giving him the game ball, is that enough for him to cozy up to Spanos, or does Staley need to get a win in the playoffs to really solidify his job?
Well, I think to answer the first question about Sean Payton, I don't think Russell Wilson is the impediment to Sean Payton being a Denver Broncos head coach. It's George Payton. Sean Payton ain't going anywhere unless he's getting a lot of power coming in the door. And so he's at that point where, like Andy Reid or Pete Carroll or Bill Belichick, he's going to have his guy by his side calling the shot. So I don't see where that, I think it's far-fetched to think he would even be with the Broncos. But as far as Staley, I think Staley's in a really good position. I mean, he's done what he was supposed to do. He didn't win the AFC West, but getting them into the playoffs after what happened last season was a big deal for them. They're probably going to be an 11-win team. I think he made a point of talking this week after they qualified for the playoffs, of talking about how they got there in terms of just overcoming all these injuries, dealing with all the issues. It's easy to forget now that we saw Justin Herbert running around with like some kind of rib cartilage tear fracture in week 2. And it was just like, is this guy going to make it through the year? And so to get to where they are now with what they've lost, I think every star player on their team, except for Austin Eckler, has been hurt this year. And so for Staley to manage them through that, I think you can still question his offensive coordinator and what they're doing with Justin Herbert. But I think he's shown that, he's a pretty good coach as far as dealing with adversity.
Pete Fox at KLOS in Los Angeles said this is what he was hearing. McVay going to the broadcasting booth with the Rams. The Rams job could have then opened up, and that Sean Payton is the popular name to take over the Rams. I don't know that that's an intriguing landing spot either.
No.
Like, everybody on the downslope, big contracts, bad cap situations. I mean, that's a little rougher than I think people may realize there for it all. I don't know. I think everyone seems to agree that Peyton's going to coach somewhere next year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're going to have to give him everything. You have to sell your soul to him. Like you said, general manager, whatever he wants, and you're giving up draft picks to the Saints, unless he goes back to the Saints. Then there are no.
Yeah, I think the Saints are a non-zero chance.
Meaning that's
Is
it.
that all you want to say?
I think there's a non-zero probability he goes to the Saints.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I would think
It would take some luck. It would take some luck, Petro, if you were a Saints fan. But
okay, yeah.
But he also could sit out for. Well, I mean, like he's not the broadcast natural that Sean McVay is. I was just watching him on Fox the other day. He looked like he was not somebody who was long for the that seat.
The
But
$28 million a year contract is not coming for him.
I don't think he's getting that kind of deal. But I do think he can wait to pick his shot. I guess I'll go back and say I don't necessarily am 100% certain he'll be back in the league next year. I think he will wait for the best opportunity to come forward. And that might have been the Chargers, to be honest with you. He might have been sitting there saying, okay, if this team falls apart and they're willing to, they haven't had a coach of that stature since Marty Schottenheimer. And we all know how that ended with A.J. Smith, the former general manager, just knocking heads all the time. I don't know if they want that kind of deal, but there will be other great job opportunities opening up at some point. I'm sure he'll pick and choose what he wants to do.
J.J.Watt has called it a career, Eric. Was he the best defensive player of his era? I mean, I know he overlaps with Aaron Donald, and Aaron Donald took that mantle from him as the injury started to pile up on J.J.Watt, but he was Aaron Donald before Aaron Donald. What is J.J.Watt's legacy?
Yeah, there's only 3 players in the history of the NFL to win Defensive Player of the Year 3 times. That's Lawrence Taylor, Aaron Donald, and J.J. Watt. So, I think unfortunately for J.J. Watt, the longevity, he was. It's hard to say the longevity wasn't there, but his peak wasn't that long because of injuries. But if you look at 2012 to 2015, I don't think there's been a defensive lineman in the NFL that was as dominant as him, especially when you consider where he played. Like I think of and again, this is sort of thinking of this from the perspective of history. 2012 to 2015 was like Reggie White level output, right? 20.5 sacks, 10.5 sacks, 20.5 sacks, 17.5 sacks, led the league in tackles for loss 3 times, led in a Pro Football Reference approximate value twice as a defensive player, also scored touchdowns, 2 touchdowns during that stretch on defense and a few more on offense. That 4-year stretch, I'm sorry, I don't know if there's a player in the history of the NFL who's had a better stretch like that defensively, individually.
Yeah, Jeff, what's your vision of what J.J. Watt is? You think of him at his best. He's the only guy in the history of the National Football League to have 2 seasons over 20 sacks. So Eric's right about the longevity, but when he was there, he was as good as it gets.
Oh, no question. I mean, Aaron Donald's probably the best player of his generation just because he's played longer. But people forget that Eric mentioned those 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards in his first 5 seasons. It was a very short amount of time. It was like a wrecking ball, and he was looking like he was going to be the best defensive player ever because he was on that kind of run. His career, unfortunately, feels a lot like Terrell Davis. His career, I know Terrell Davis didn't play as long as he did, but Terrell Davis was a dominant running back, a force of nature for about 3 or 4 years, and that's what J.J. Watt was. And if he hadn't gotten hurt and hadn't wound up playing in Arizona and not doing much there, I think they would be talking about him. For me, the top 3 defensive players I've ever seen are Reggie White, Lawrence Taylor, and probably Ronnie Lott or Deion Sanders. He would have been in the top 5 of that group easily.
Sacks by season, 5.5 as a rookie, then 20.5, 10.5, 20.5, 17.5, 2 injury plague years where he played 3 and 5 games. Came back, played 16 games, had 16 sacks. And then 4, 5, 1. This year, 9.5. He's playing pretty good football. The one thing I would point out that I think is of note, I think if you weren't playing on a crappy team, he wouldn't be retiring. It's possible.
Mentioned.
Yeah, it's possible. I'm sorry, I didn't see that up there, but I think it's possible. I mean, he did have the heart scare condition that was going on. He did have a kid. Family can change things. So I don't want to put words in the man's mouth, but if he were, high-fiving Patrick Mahomes running off the field or high-fiving Aaron Rodgers and, he was the difference in them winning more games. The man can still clearly still play 37%. He's been double-teamed this year. It's number 1 in the NFL. So they're worried about him when he goes out there, even at age 33.
He's had multiple sack games. I mean, he's been a really good player now. I mean, in some ways, he's like foregone the opportunity to have kind of the Kurt Warner defensive career, right? Where he starts out Hall of Fame, has the lull in the middle, ends Hall of Fame. I think Watt's in the Hall of Fame no matter what, but like, there's an aspect of how well he's played and how, relatively healthy he's been this year. That was cool. And maybe that's the way he wanted to go out. He wanted to go out. Hopefully he gets a half a sack or more in the next few games. He goes out with another double-digit sack season in his last year, and it looks great. Do you guys think, not to throw the question back, but if he played for better teams, like I know those Houston teams made the playoffs, but we're talking about, the noon game on the Saturday on NBC playoff game every year. Like if he played on like a really good football team like Donald, do we think, is he in the conversation with Donald, or is he the number one guy? Right? Because I think Donald played on great defenses, highest stages, 2 Super Bowl appearances, all that. Do we miss Watt a little bit because he played for Houston?
Well, I'll say that. I mean, Aaron Donald got a bump because of what the Rams became when they got to LA, but they were a crap team for a long time before. So nobody was talking about him. He's going to be the best defensive player ever when they were in St. Louis. So I do agree that probably affects Watt in ways that it shouldn't. But, I just think that position by nature is a hard position to evaluate. And I think unless you're putting up huge numbers, people don't give you the credit you deserve. And I think Aaron Donald is a freak of nature in a different kind of way. He's a smaller guy. He thrives off quickness, and he looks flashier in doing it. But again, like J.J.Watt, you go back and watch tape of him or just watch the game. I mean, he was like plucking balls out of the air, running the end zone, and forced a ton of fumbles. I mean, he was a turnover machine when it came to getting to the quarterback and getting the ball out. I just think he's underrated for what he was because, again, those two guys from that period to now over a 10-year period, Ray Lewis was done when they got in. Charles Woodson was done. It's only those two guys.
Yeah, no doubt. The 2D podcast proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, serving the entire Kansas City metro area. Gann Asphalt and Concrete is Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in KC since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Make sure you tell them you heard about them on the 2D podcast. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lots. The Dolphins are on a 4-game losing skid, Jeff. Have they tanked? Is this it? Is it over? 2 is in concussion protocol. Are we done with the Dolphins as far as the playoff talk right now?
I'm not ready to go there because I don't think the Jets and the Dolphins, who they're going to finish the season with, are anything to really be scared of. And so I have some optimism that Teddy Bridgewater could go out and perform at a sufficient enough level for them to get the win in those 2 games. But yeah, it's certainly a precarious spot for them to be in. And it's certainly a very ugly look, a very awkward look, given Tua's concussion history already this season. It's kind of weird because they haven't been able to get their defense right. Made the big move for Bradley Chubb. Xavier Howard hasn't been that good this year. Byron Jones has vanished. I mean, that hadn't been.
We lost him.
Yeah, exactly. Completely went off the grid. And so all they have is that offense and those 2 receivers, and that they got some speed at running back. But it really comes down to, can they get Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill going in a big way to get to the playoffs? If they can't, they're not going to be there.
Yeah, at the Patriots, Eric, versus the Jets. Those are winnable football games. Neither one of those teams is firing around right now. I don't think Tua is going to play. I don't think there's any way, when it's your 3rd time in one season, anybody is going to clear him in the concussion protocol. So you tell me, can they get there with that schedule that's left?
Well, no one cares about my bets, but I do have a Dolphins under 8.5 wins going into the season. And I got some crap on Twitter by people posting the video of me saying it. And I really do want to retweet them out of pettiness. So I hope that they lose the next 2.
Yeah, just to be clear, you are a very petty man. So look forward to that.
Yeah.
Those tweets coming from Eric in a very near future.
I'm petty.
Oh, no, it's a joke.
I mean, I
Just a little.
maybe I could. I don't know.
Settle down.
But Bridgewater's a good enough backup where, they're only 3-point underdogs against New England. New England's a mess as well. So, that one's certainly winnable. I think the Jets game is also winnable. So, not the Jets game. Who they got? They got Bills second, right? No, they got the Jets. So, yeah, I mean, I think that they finish 1-1. Does 1-1 get them in? At 9-8, it depends upon what happens to what happens to the Jets and things like that. But it's just, to me, I just think like all like the luster of this season after starting 8-3, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. Oh my God, this is an amazing team with an amazing coach. Like no matter what happens, no matter how many of these games they win at the end of the season, all that's gone. Right? They're a team that everybody wants to play in the playoffs.
Well, and not just that. I mean, I'm going to touch you off, but
no, go for it.
There's some questions about Tua now as a future quarterback. I mean, do you want to invest in that?
Mike McDaniel is the head coach.
Yeah.
I remember when
I think McDaniel's been great, but like I think that people have. You brought up Sean Payton a little bit ago. Like, that's not out of the question.
Interesting that they would pull the plug. I don't know. I think he's looked good enough that I would not be looking to pull the plug. He has lost at 49ers, at Chargers, at Bills. That's a bitch.
Yes, but before then, all the wins, Petro, were like Bears and Cleveland. Like the wins were crappy and the losses were legit. Like I think that's been like the whole Dolphins season. So
they beat the Patriots. They won at the Ravens. They beat the Bills. Is that not legit? They beat a Mike Tomlin Steeler team, which is always respectable. You're always going batty about the Lions. They beat the Lions. The Bears. That's not.
Detroit had a 14-0 lead in that game. Though Detroit fought hard.
I think
they fought hard, Petro.
They did. We'll get to the Lions in a minute. Listen, they're 8-7. They lost him for 2 games. Lost Tua for 2 games, and he went down in one of the other games that they lost. And so in games that he has started and finished, and I don't think he didn't finish obviously the Packer game. No, he did. This came up afterwards, right? He did finish the Packer game.
Yeah, he finished.
So in games that he's started and finished, they're 8-4 this year with Tua. I'll go back to what I was going to say was I remember when the football team took RG3, they took Kirk Cousins and everyone was talking about how ridiculous it was. I'm like, I don't know. Did you see RG3 play at Baylor? Like, if you think there's a good quarterback talent, RG3 didn't make it through many seasons of Baylor unscathed. Why do you think he's going to suddenly play 16 games every year in the NFL? So, I mean, I think if you have Tua as your quarterback, you hope that he develops into a Joe Montana and you find nobody's going to find Steve Young to back him up, but you better find a good backup behind him because he's not likely to play 16.
Is this just Kansas State propaganda with Skylar Thompson?
No. Well, there's I'm sure plenty of K-State fans on here that want to see some Skylar Thompson. They've already announced that it's going to be Teddy Bridgewater that's going to start. Listen, we asked the question, are they done? The answer is God, no, they're not done. If we go back to, I know our questions are really just jumping off points to talk about the subject matter, but listen, who's catching them? 7-8 New England, who's home for the Dolphins, head-to-head, that's their shot. They would pull even, but again, that's a split. I'd have to go through the tiebreakers on how it comes down to because they would split head-to-head. Divisionally, I can look here on my little chart. The Dolphins divisionally, they're both 2-2, so the Pats would have the tiebreaker, but then the Pats got to go to Buffalo. So they're not winning at Buffalo.
What about the Jets win out, Petro?
No chance. At Seattle and at Miami? No, I don't see that happening either. So, like, and then the 7-8 Titans.
It's the Raiders and the Steelers after that, right?
And at Jacksonville. Yeah, then we get down to the Raiders and Steelers, who are even further off the pace. I mean, come on. No. I think the Dolphins get there. I think one win probably gets them there. Don't you? Don't you think if they win one,
yeah,
there?
Yeah, I just think I wonder, can you win both those games with your backup?
I think
Jets are a damn good defense.
If, to go back to Jeff's earlier point, if he can become a defensive coach and not ask Teddy Bridgewater to go try to throw for 350 and 5 touchdowns and run some more reverses with Waddle and Tyreek Hill and do some other things and manage the game, then yeah, I think they can get there. Are the Packers a playoff team, Jeff?
No, I'm not buying that just yet. I mean, it would be an amazing story if they got there in a really bad playoff game if they were in the postseason, but I just they haven't been a playoff team all year, and it just felt like that game that they won against Miami was more about Tua melting down than it was about them really taking control of things. Aaron Rodgers made some nice plays. Defense got 4 turnovers, and I respect that. And I always talk about giveaways versus takeaways. Even though there were some ducks out there, they had to catch them. But I just don't. I think the Vikings will beat them again after destroying them the first time around. They won't have an answer for Justin Jefferson. And I think the Lions find a way to get that last win. I just feel like there's, I know Eric likes that, but I don't see that they've been so far down for so long. They're in the same place as the Bucs. We're not talking about them tonight, but it's just when you don't look like a playoff team all year, you don't get the benefit of getting into the postseason at the end of it. We saw that last year with the Steelers, and it was just a mess. I just think there's better teams in the NFC, and those teams will find a way to beat out the Packers.
37-30 was the score in the Eagles and Packers game with 9 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. The Eagles got a field goal to go up by 10 with 2 minutes to go. The game was basically over at that point. I'm not going to say, it's 20-20 in the second quarter with the Eagles. That was the last game they lost before they went on their win streak, the Packers I'm talking about. The game before that, they lost to the Tennessee Titans. It was 20-17, Tennessee going into the fourth quarter. It was a 3-point game. I bring that up just to say, okay, I'm with you. I don't think their body of work says really good, but again, we've got 7 teams that are now going to make it, and so I thought a lot of times, always 6, and a lot of times 5 and 6 in the playoffs are just commercial filler, right? I don't think they're anyone's thought that they're going to win a championship. But are we grading too harsh? Because if you say, well, those were hard-fought games against the Titans at that time were playing good football. The Eagles were definitely playing good football. The week before that, they beat the Cowboys 31-28. If you look at it that way, that's kind of 6 games of fairly high-level football, Eric. And you're not – you are what your record says you are, but does that deserve a little more consideration?
Yeah, a couple things. Like, I agree with you. Their offense has statistically been quite good for the last 2 months. That being said, like, it's in an NFC that's not particularly great. So yeah, I think we have to grade that on a curve. They've only won 3 games by more than a touchdown all year, and that was Chicago, and a bad Rams team. So it's not like they've been all that impressive, even in even in a bad NFC. Then the big one for me, and why I agree with Jeff that I don't even think they're going to win another game the rest of the year. Christian Watson's banged up. That was the catalyst for the offense kind of finding its way. Dallas game and beyond, and he missed the second half of the Dolphins game. I don't know. I don't think his status is particularly positive for this week. And the Vikings are a team. Their defense isn't particularly good, but you cut out one of the Packers' legs, namely their only deep threat. And I think, you go to the other side of the argument. I said the Packers offense has played great. Defense has sucked all year. So I think that, I think the Vikings boat race them. And frankly, I think Detroit, to Jeff's point, I think Detroit runs all over them in week 18.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see how it plays out. Big game this weekend against the Minnesota Vikings. Eagles allowed 74 points the last 2 weeks. Does that mean their defense is now a liability, Jeff? They are piling up injuries. That's becoming a big question for the Eagles as well. Where do we sit now with the amount of points that they're giving up?
No, Cowboys or Eagles?
I'm sorry. Yes. Injuries are – I merged 2 topics. Cowboys defense becoming a problem, giving up 74 points for the last 2 weeks. Eagles are taking on water in a lot of places because of the injuries. What do we make of these 2 teams?
I've got concerns about the Cowboys defense. In fact, I think they only got 1 sack in the last 3 games too. Like, they haven't really been getting after the quarterback in the sense, which is what they hang their hat on there. And so, the good news is the offense is, at least Dak played pretty good last week. He's had some issues turning the ball over, but if they're not playing great defense, they're not going very far. That's what it comes down to with that team. They need to be able to unleash the hounds, have Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, all those guys getting after the quarterback. Because when they are on the field and having to play run defense, you see their limitations. You see them being an easy out. And I think it does matter. Now, granted, the Jacksonville Jaguars offensively have come around a lot in the last 2 months with Trevor Lawrence. The Eagles with Gardner Minshew still have a ton of weapons and Devontae Smith. But the Cowboys have lost their second corner in Anthony Brown, which is a big loss there. They would admit to you that they are not, they're not great against the run. I think they're like 26th or 27th in the league against the run. So if you're going to face them and they're going to see the Eagles, they're going to see Dalvin Cook, they're going to see the 49ers who are going to run football. Heck, they might get the Panthers, who just ran all over the Detroit Lions this past weekend. It's a problem. It's a big problem.
Yeah. Eric, what do you think about the way the Cowboys are coming down the finish line?
It's not encouraging. I mean, you give up a big lead to the Jaguars, and I know some of it was aided a little bit by Dak, but that's part of it. Like Dak's a privilege in some of these games. Like he throws interceptions, and even though I still believe he's the best quarterback in the NFC playoffs, like he has warts, and those warts sometimes put their defense in precarious positions to give up points. Jeff's point, like they're not getting to the passer. I think part of that is Micah Parsons, who was huge favorite to be defensive player of the year early in the season, has kind of petered off because I think he got injured in the Vikings game and hasn't been the same since. Defensively they missed Jaron Kearse for a game because of an injury. He was all around the ball against the Eagles, but again, he's been banged up at times this year. Diggs has not been quite as good. I don't know. We talk about this for I'm going to be fair to the Cowboys because we talk about this with the Chiefs all the time. Defense is really an oscillatory thing, right? So maybe they're just hitting the rough patch now and they perform okay in the playoffs, but it's not encouraging right now for Dallas.
Yeah. No. Is it encouraging for the Eagles? Are they not just Jalen Hurts being hurt, Jeff, but coming down, finishing this way? They got defenders going down everywhere. Is this a team that it's going to be the kind of the Ravens of 2019, maybe peak too early? Injuries are such a part of the game. They're not really a very healthy team at this moment. They are very close to being able to at least have that extra week, or have 2 weeks to prepare their first game, which is huge for them, which I think makes it very vital for them to actually get one more win and maybe even, be able to sit a lot of other guys in that final week as well.
Yeah, I think that bye is crucial to them. I think one of the most underrated losses they've had this year, injury-wise, was C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who was playing at a super high level and leading league in interceptions when he went down a few weeks ago. But I think one thing the Eagles have that helps you when your defense is struggling is when Hurts is healthy, they can control the tempo and they can run all types of different offense at you. If they need to be a big play about it, they can go to Devontae Smith or A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert's back. If they need to load up and run the football 50 times, they got Miles Sanders and Hurts to do it, the big offensive line. So that's why that's been their calling call all year long, knowing that whatever they need to do, whatever they're facing roster-wise, they can adjust. And Nick Sirianni and Shane Steichen that Eric mentioned earlier, those guys are really smart and humble enough to understand it's not about being the smartest guys and looking super impressive. It's about, okay, what are we working with this week? How can we make this work? So I don't worry about them as much with the injury because I think that, they'll find a way to get through it because they have other options.
Where's your concern, Eric?
I don't have, I think defensively, Jeff said it, they're a little brittle now that the secondary has had some injuries. The defensive line, I think Reddick has played wonderful football. I think on the interior, they need somebody to play like a superstar coming down the stretch. I think, Cox and, Jordan Davis and, they're all playing well, but like they need a guy to emerge as a superstar. So, they're not as much of a house on defense, but, getting a bye will really help that. I was actually I thought Gardner Minshew played a great game on Sunday. And I thought he highlighted a lot of, not a perfect game, certainly, but how many NFL teams could use Gardner Minshew to start for them next year? It's probably 10. I thought Smith played one. Devontae Smith has been a great compliment to A.J. Brown. The tight end Goddard is, one of the top 5 players of the position in the league. Sanders lets him down a little bit, but for the most part, he's a good back in the line. Lane Johnson being hurt hurts them. So there's a little, brittleness there. Their best, thing is that, Minnesota is weaker. The teams, in the NFC East after them are weaker. So I don't think it's going to hurt them as much as it would a 1 seed in the AFC. But, there's some good and some bad right now for the Eagles.
All right, Bills, Bengals, Monday Night Football. This is giant. Bills need to keep winning to stay in front of the Chiefs for the number 1 seed. Bengals with a win, get into the mix. Can see a path at that point. I don't think it gets there, but how big is this game? I think it's safe to say biggest game of the year, right?
I think, as we say at my place, it's the game of the year this week. So it's huge. I mean, it's like it's there's only so many matchups you're going to have over the course of a season like this where you're going to know you've got 2 heavyweights, and I feel like 2 heavyweights that are trending in the right direction. The Bills we talked about yesterday on our other podcast. What I like is that they understand they're going to have to be able to run the football to win some of these games. That they cannot rely solely on Josh Allen to be a superhero and pull them to a championship. And so getting Singletary going, getting Cook going, knowing you have that ace in your hole of being able to get Allen going on design runs, I think that's huge because that was stuff they were doing towards the end of last year that started to get them right offensively. And there was a part of me that, I think I forget who it is on here who's really tapped into the Buffalo podcast scene or the, whatever's happening over there. But you do have to wonder how much have they been trying to nurse Allen through some of these injuries and get him to a place much like Herbert was earlier this year with with that rib injury where he can be more functional and less of a detriment. But I think, I think that they come into this game feeling really good. And as I said before, I think some of the defensive problems with the Bills and the loss of Lyle Collins at right tackle could be significant. Like these kind of games, those kind of injuries can have huge impacts.
I want to be clear what's at stake because if the Bengals win and get into a head-to-head with the Bills, you would, or even I don't think there's, there could be a 3-way if the Chiefs lost somewhere along the way with Jared Stidham scheduled to start for the Raiders. That's unlikely, but in a 3-way tie, the Bengals win. Okay, so that's what it means. It means they hold in their hand the ability to need just one thing, and that's the Chiefs to trip up, which again seems unlikely with the state of the Broncos and the Raiders that are there, but that's where they would be because conference record, they would all be sitting at 8-3. I think it would come down to common.
If the Bengals have wins over the Chiefs and the Bills, it automatically,
which would be the first one. Did one of the opponents sweep the other two? And the answer would be yes with the Bengals if that gets there. And if the Bills win it, they would have that as well. But obviously, there's no way to get there mathematically with it. So it is a giant game, Eric, this week. You like the Bengals. We said that we were talking about this on our Kansas City podcast last night, but it's a fight.
Yeah, and I think I'm playing into. I'm trying to thread this yarn here. Like the Bengals are where the Chiefs were last year, where they start 3-4. Everybody they're coming off a Super Bowl loss. Everybody's like, "What the heck is going on?" You lose to the Ravens. You're behind them in the standings in your own division, much like the Chiefs were to the Chargers last year. You have to win a bunch of games. I mean, it's literally playing out the same, right? Like they've won all those games in a row. Now, the Chiefs tripped up in week 17 last year on the road in Cincinnati and then whimpered into the playoffs and a win against Denver that wasn't great. Had a game against Buffalo and then ran out of gas in the playoffs. My thought, when you look at the Bengals, to get the road to the playoffs, the road to the AFC North is win this week, and then you have to win next week in all likelihood if the Ravens can beat the Steelers on Sunday Night Football. Like, I think this team's going to be worn the hell out by the time it gets to the playoffs, which that's like their hope is clearly to win out and hope the Chiefs lose a game so they can get the 1 seed and get some rest. So to me, I think the Buffalo's already kind of been like, look, Buffalo does want the 1 seed, of course, as well. And I think that they're, obviously going to play hard. I just think the Bengals right now are playing better than anybody in the NFL, with the caveat that if they continue to play this way, it's going to wear them out by the time the playoffs, start.
I like this. Let's send Eric to the game in Cincy. The Bengals win every time he's in attendance.
They were 6-1 last year when I went to their
That's
games,
right.
including the one in Kansas City, unfortunately.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Two Deep is brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete, nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor. They've been making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. You can find them online at gannasphalt.com. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lots. Derek Carr has been benched, Jeff. This is a sign that they don't want him to get hurt and because if he gets hurt, then there are guarantees that kick into his contract. So that's all this is. And if you don't want the guarantees to kick in, pretty much means, I don't want to say it means you've decided you're moving on, but at least means you've decided you want the option to move on when you get to the end of this year, right? There's no other way you can look at what's going on with the Raiders any other way.
Yeah, and in the way I understand it, they have like a 3-day window after the Super Bowl to move him before like another guarantee kicks in. And so, yeah, I think that there is this is the end of it for Derek Carr. And it feels like the Raiders are obviously not the same comparison to be made here because Alex Smith had a lot more success with the Chiefs than Derek Carr's had with the Raiders, but they're in a place where they feel like, okay, we can't go any farther with this guy. And so what do we do here? We don't owe him any more guaranteed money after this year if we play it correctly. You know, we feel like, well, I can't speak for them. I think they know they've got some massive holes to fill in their roster, especially on the defensive side of things. Chandler Jones didn't work out. Their secondary is a disaster. I think you go back to that big draft and they had 3 picks and one guy's in jail. Another guy is, I think, got booted off because he went to jail. The third guy is playing for the Tennessee Titans, right? Or whoever he's playing. Who is Abram playing for now? The Rams?
Yeah, I don't even
Where's
remember.
Jonathan Abram? He's with Seattle. He's playing for the Seahawks. Jonathan Abram. So, yeah, I think that it's time for them to start looking for options, but like, what are the options they're going to get? I mean, like, what's a really great move for them to get better offensively? I just don't see it out there. And I do wonder, how does Devontae Adams feel about all this? Because he was the bait that got him there in the first place.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well, Eric. I mean, how about it? You bring this guy in, you bring in his college teammate. You're basically saying, okay, yeah, you know, we're gonna get the band back together, and you can be real happy to come on out here. Like, are you just setting yourself up for another malcontent wide receiver that's going to want to shoot his way out of town? Or is it that they just want to bring the number down on Carr? This is listen, we've got to take the shot across his bow. They're going to look around. Let's mention Tom Brady.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to tell you, people in Las Vegas, Tom Brady, it was not, Adam Hill, who is as good as it gets at covering a team, covers the Raiders. And he reported this at the time several years ago that Brady was there and was talking to Mark Davis and the Raiders were the team. And then Gronk goes and has his podcast. And they talk about how the Raiders were approaching both Gronk and Brady. Listen, I would not be shocked. Everybody's like, oh, he'll go back to the Pats because they've got the old Penn State coach, Texans
He's
coach.
not going back. Bill O'Brien.
Bill O'Brien back there. He'll go back there. Listen, he'd go like his guy is the head coach of the Raiders.
Mm-hmm.
So is this the one? Okay, make their push for Tom Brady, and if you don't get him, fine, move on someplace else because Derek Carr only is. I mean, to me, Derek Carr is the cautionary tale of giving a lot of money to a guy who's just pretty good, right? Like, he isn't any better than Fitzmagic was. So when you pay him,
I'm worn out by this topic, Petro. The fact of the matter is, the difference between Derek Carr and Patrick Mahomes money wise is nowhere close to the difference between Patrick Mahomes and Derek Carr talent wise. And when you make that fraction, it sucks for the Raiders, right?
But that's my point. Is this one, to make a push at Brady, but two, the fallback is they've made it clear we will move on and they renegotiate this deal.
I remember Jay Cutler, my Minnesota State University alumni brethren, Mark Trestman benched Jay Cutler at the end of the season for Jimmy Clausen. And then they went back to Cutler the next year. I think it was a new head coach. I think it was John Fox. Like, I don't think teams do this, though. Like, I don't think teams just, like, bench a guy at the end and then, whoopsie daisy. I know, they did it with Randall Cunningham in the Rich Kotite era, but then that was Ray Rhodes after that. Like unless there's a coaching change, like I don't think they're gonna like go back to Carr. This is to save the money, right? This is to because they got to find out. They got to know in February whether or not they're going to apply this guaranteed money to him in February. Like not a lot of the people have sat down in the musical chairs yet. So I think this is a move on from him situation. They've even let him leave the team. So I think they move on from him. I don't have that much sympathy for Adams because Adams was offered the exact same freaking deal with the Packers and said he wanted to go to Vegas. So like what you're up against. If you didn't know that David Carr or Derek Carr was not that good, then that's on you. You've played with him before. Like this is a you problem and not a them problem. So the problem is, the way that they're going to shoot themselves out of this is drafting better, and they drafted horribly for decades now, right? So that the new general manager and new head coach have to draft better than they have before, because as Jeff's pointed out to, like none of their draft picks have worked, and that's led to Derek Carr. You got me messed up, Petro. Derek Carr, not doing much. You can play well when you have a quarterback of his caliber. Look at Minnesota this year. Look at Detroit this year. Look at that kind of thing. But you have to draft well, or you have to get lucky, and the Raiders have done neither lately.
Right. No doubt. I look forward to talking about the massive deal that Derek Carr gets to go to the Jets, or to go to Atlanta, or to go
wherever. About Miami.
It's coming.
The Jets are making. The Jets will make the mark my words, folks. The Jets are going to make the classic error of, our defense is amazing if we just had an okay quarterback, and then Quinton Williams gets hurt, Sauce Gardner gets hurt, or the defense just regresses, and everybody's like, well, why wasn't Derek Carr the answer? This thing has been done a million times. I guarantee you. I
have good offensive players there, though. Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, the offensive line. They got
so do the Raiders, by the way. The Raiders have Darren Waller and Devontae Adams, and Josh Jacobs is leading the league in rushing, and Derek Carr was still a pumpkin this year. But the team, and it's at the Colts. If the Colts sign Derek Carr, I'm putting up that Arrested Development meme where it's like it hasn't worked for everybody else, but it might work for us. Like I don't get the Derek Carr thing. We know
he's not getting cut, right? We know he's getting traded, right? That's what we know. He's not getting cut.
It's only $5 million to cut him.
He's got value. There's no way they're going to just let him walk out the street. I mean, he's not like.
I mean, the Vikings might be trading Cousins. There are a lot of quarterback. The Jimmy Garoppolo is on the open market. Kirk Cousins very well could be on the open market, given what the Vikings cap situation is like. They have to sign Justin Jefferson, and so there's going to be a lot of quarterbacks that kind of like Spider-Man meme Derek Carr that are also going to be available. So a team I don't think is going to be like backing up the truck to give a second-round pick to the Raiders.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I don't even think he's played that much worse than last year. The team has just gotten that much worse when it's all said and done. Eric, you get first shot at Justin Herbert. Has he checked all the boxes now? Are we ready to say he's one of the elites, or no, is it now he's got to go out and win playoff games? Has he at least reached Phillip Rivers status?
Yeah, Phillip Rivers, sure. I mean, where are we going here, boys? Mahomes, Burrow, Allen,
keep going.
Those guys. I think a step below you have Herbert, right?
That makes him 4, right?
Yeah, but he's not anywhere close to the first 3, right?
I mean, Philly right now is saying, "Where's my man Jalen Hurts?" They're real excited about him, so I think they'd want to hear his name mentioned in there somewhere.
I'll give Herbert this. Herbert has done a lot with almost nothing this year, but that team scored 20 points on Monday. They scored 17 against the dog-ass Titans the week before then. They scored 23 in that Sunday night game against Miami. They're still not putting up that many points. I know he's overcoming a lot, but Mike Williams is healthy right now. Keenan Allen's healthy right now. Austin Eckler's healthy right now. And that team's putting up – that team can't score in the third quarter. They haven't scored a third quarter point in forever. They're just lucky Nick Foles is worse than me at quarterback right now.
I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be a part of this discussion before long. But I think that's kind of your list. Although I will point out that Justin Herbert ranks 14th in QBR, behind names like Derek Carr, Trevor Lawrence, Daniel Jones, Lamar Jackson, Jacoby Brissett, Dak Prescott, Joe Burrow, Jared Goff, Geno Smith.
But he's also played with so few offensive players that he would, if he had for an entire season, it would look differently. I mean, it's not like he had his entire offense.
He's just barely ahead of Marcus Mariota.
Yeah. Well, count the wins. count the wins.
I mean, look, they made the playoffs. I will say they made the playoffs, and I got to say, as a Chiefs fan, I do not want them to play the Chargers again.
Agreed.
I'd like for him to get called by a different team, but I think like the Ringer having him be the second best quarterback in the NFL rated for the last 2 months straight, that's egregious. That is an egregious ranking of Herbert. He is a tier 2 quarterback.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that because I bring it up. Listen, I think there's obviously a flaw in the QBR numbers when Marcus Mariota is ranked right there with Justin Herbert. But I do think there's also something to it that it does show that he is a step away, like what you said, the tier 2. The Lions, Jeff, did they blow it? Lions lioned. Is that what we saw against Carolina? Or is that we're not giving near enough credit to what Steve Wilkes has done at Carolina?
I think it's more about what Steve Wilkes has done. And he probably should be the head coach of that team next season, given how this team has performed. They were left for dead when they fired Matt Rule and traded Christian McCaffrey and all the revolving door quarterbacks. Like, it's kind of amazing. I'm trying to think of a season that where a team has a chance to win their division, albeit with a losing record, that's gone through more strife than this team has this year. So I give him a ton of credit for that. But again, as somebody who's watched the Lions, Eric's such a newbie to this kind of stuff. And I know all these people want to hop on. It's like all these people who want to grow beards and get tattoos and cuff their jeans. Like, I think it's a cool look. Like, no one's ever done this before. Like, I've been down this road. I know what comes with, watching the Lions year in and year out being optimistic. So no shock at all that they laid an egg here. I think they haven't blown it just yet because – I think I don't believe in the Commanders. When you're going to Carson Wentz at this point in the season, that says something about where you're at. And I don't believe in the Packers or the Seahawks. So I think just by the process of elimination, they're the last one left standing.
Yeah. Eric, what are you going to say about your Lions now versus Bears at Packers? Or what they have.
I echo what Jeff said, by the way. I think Wilkes, if you take a step back, Wilkes got a bad deal in Arizona.
Yep.
Getting a second chance now probably deserves another chance.
I will, if we're going to bring that up here real quick, this is a great point from Brett. I mean, those of us, that are in Kansas City, I cover Missouri football as well. How is this the same as DC, Steve Wilkes, crazy turnaround? I mean, they were awful. I mean, I think it just speaks to like coaching college and coaching the pros is different.
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead to your point on the Lions.
Yeah, I mean, look, like the Lions gave up 167 yards on the ground the previous 3 weeks. The last 5 games before that game, only one game they gave up 100 yards or more on the ground, and that was with Josh Allen's Bills. So, whatever they had figured out in the run game defensively, they lost against the Panthers. So some of that has to be the Panthers figuring things out on Detroit's problem. Goff threw 3 touchdowns to something called Shane Zylstra. I thought Goff, within his limitations, still is playing good football. The Bears are not a good defense. The game's indoors. The Bears are not trying to win. You can tell that at the end of games. Obviously, Fields is a problem, but the Lions are 6.5-point favorites. I expect them to take down that game. But to Jeff's point, you basically need, if you are a Lions fan, you need either the Giants to lose out, which will be tough, but not impossible given the fact that they're not very good. You need the Browns to beat the Commanders this week, and you need the Jets to go on the road in a Pete Carroll revenge game and beat the Seahawks this week. And once you have that, then Detroit, Green Bay is a win and in for Detroit. And it could be a win and in for Green Bay if Green Bay wins against Minnesota at home. So I think it is setting up okay for them, but they need help and they need to be consistent for 2 weeks, which we saw consistency for them for the last month and a half. Last week was, really, I mean, if they would have won that game, everything played out perfectly for them in the NFC. And it was just a missed opportunity to Jeff's point.
Let's be honest. We say like, did they blow it with this? No, they blew it and early on.
They blew it by losing to the Vikings in week 3 when they had a 10-point fourth quarter lead. They blew it by blowing a 14-point lead against Tua at home. Like that's where they blew it. This game was it was a bad matchup for them and they got killed.
Yeah. That is where it all ended. All right, let's wrap it up with what you're looking for this week. Jeff, what's top of mind for you on this week's slate?
Hey, I'll be in Cincinnati for Bills Bengals. I know Eric won't be there, so the disappointment of so many Chiefs fans on this, but it's going to be a great game. I'm just curious to see how it plays out. I said yesterday on our other podcast, I can't remember the last time Josh Allen played badly in a game they had to win, and so I'm betting he plays phenomenally tomorrow or on Monday.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal one. It's a big game late, which you love to see. Eric, what are you looking at?
I'll probably be watching this game at your house, Petro. Vikings go on the road to face the Packers at 425. This one opened Packers -4. It's been bet down a little bit, but some money back on Green Bay. The Vikings are the worst 12-3 team in the history of the NFL, but that doesn't mean that they can't go on the road and beat Green Bay and win their 13th game. It would be one of, I think, 3 or 4 seasons in Vikings history that they've done that. I was there last Saturday. Really fun team with Adolfo Mensa and O'Connell and even Kirk Cousins, I think, is playing tough football for the first time since he's been there. So it's a fun team to watch. Green Bay's on a roll. Like I'm really interested to see what happens in that game.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fun game as well. I think there's actually a lot of games as I was looking at it, I'm like, oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. That's a good one. I think Panthers Bucks is a fun
huge.
Game.
Yeah,
See if Steve Wilkes can keep that going there. I'm very much looking forward to that. That's just a 3-point game right now. But I always kind of like to point out some of the under the radar games. And the Jets are still alive after everybody and their brother has played quarterbacks. Jets, Seahawks, 2 teams that weren't supposed to be anywhere near it that are both fighting for playoff spots. Kind of like that game. I think it's kind of crafty and just the quarterback carousel that's going on with the Jets. And then whether or not Geno Smith, the pumpkin, arrived. The coach turned into a pumpkin and he's been discovered, or can he get back to playing good football, good Alex Smith style football, and keep them going? I think that's an intriguing game to watch. That's going to do it for us. Remember, if you're catching us via the podcast, we stream live Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. We want to thank our sponsor, Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lots. You can find them online at GannAsphalt.com. Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in KC since 1994. Check them out online at GannAsphalt.com. For Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, NFL.com, Eric Eager from Sumer Sports, SumerSports.com. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB, 810WHB.com, where you can hear my show, saying thank you very much for joining us here on 2 Deep.